In front of nearly 3,000 people, a single gunshot rang out. The speaker collapsed on stage, and the crowd erupted in chaos. But the real mystery wasn't his death. It was the shooter, because despite helicopters, police, and FBI swarming the area, the killer vanished without a trace. And hours later, investigators found something in a nearby alley that only deepened the nightmare. Before we dive into this chilling story, if you are new here, please like and subscribe to our channel, and tell us where you are watching from in the comment section. The story begins on a warm September evening in Orem, Utah. Utah Valley University's open-air event plaza had been buzzing since the afternoon. People poured in from all over the state, eager to attend a highly anticipated appearance by a controversial public figure. Some came in support, others came out of curiosity, and still others came ready to challenge him. But regardless of opinion, the event promised drama, and it would deliver, though not in the way anyone expected. By 6 p.m., the crowd had swelled to over 3,000. Campus security and hired staff tried to control the flow of people, checking tickets, scanning bags, and directing attendees to rows of folding chairs set up in the plaza. On the edges of the crowd, dozens of protesters carried signs, chanting slogans, but the atmosphere was more tense than violent. Police had been stationed along the perimeter to ensure things didn't escalate. The speaker, known for his fiery debates and unfiltered commentary, arrived shortly before the event began. He was ushered backstage, shielded by security, though several in the crowd spotted him and shouted his name. He waved briefly, flashing the confident smile that his supporters admired and his critics mocked. At exactly 7 p.m., the stage lights cut through the dusk, and the man walked out to thunderous applause mixed with jeers. Microphones picked up the first words of his opening remarks, and cameras flashed from every direction. For a brief moment, the evening felt like any other political or social event, a gathering of voices, clashing opinions, and one figure at the center of it all. But as he settled into his rhythm, pacing the stage, pointing to the audience, and throwing out his first sharp lines, something was happening high above the plaza. While the crowd focused on the stage, someone else was watching. From the rooftop of a nearby building, eyes tracked the speaker's every movement. The person held a weapon, steady and ready. At 7:16 p.m., it happened. A loud crack tore through the night air. At first, many in the audience thought it was fireworks, or maybe even a speaker malfunction. But in the harsh stage lighting, the truth was undeniable. The speaker clutched his chest, staggered, and collapsed to the floor of the stage. For half a second, silence rippled across the crowd. Then panic erupted. Screams, shouts, and the thunder of thousands of people pushing and stumbling to escape the plaza. Security rushed the stage. Some tried to lift the man. Others scanned the rooftops in terror. Officers shouted for everyone to get down, but no one listened. The scene devolved into absolute chaos. Local police units, already stationed nearby, scrambled into action. Within minutes, more than 20 officers were sweeping the surrounding buildings. Helicopters were in the air, their searchlights raking across the rooftops of downtown Orem. But here's where the story takes its sinister turn. Despite the enormous crowd, despite dozens of cameras, and despite law enforcement flooding the area in minutes, the shooter was gone. No one had seen a figure fleeing. No one captured clear footage of a person holding a weapon. Witnesses reported hearing the sound, seeing the collapse, and then nothing. The killer had fired a single shot and vanished. Back at the stage, paramedics worked frantically, but it was no use. The speaker was declared dead before he even reached the ambulance. Officers immediately classified it as a homicide, and within the hour, federal agents had joined the scene. The FBI was taking no chances. This wasn't just a crime. It was a national security nightmare. Investigators locked down the campus. They began questioning witnesses, combing through cell phone videos, and demanding access to security footage from nearby buildings. But the footage revealed a strange and frustrating pattern. Either cameras were facing the wrong angle, or they'd been conveniently blocked by trees, banners, or shadows. In a world where nearly every event is recorded from multiple angles, this one seemed cursed. The critical moment, the shooter's position, remained invisible. By midnight, police still had no suspect. No vehicle descriptions, no fleeing figure, nothing. For the thousands who had been there, The fear lingered. Some wondered aloud, if a shooter could escape from such a crowded, well-guarded space, what else were they capable of? Then, just after 2 a.m., a patrol unit made a discovery. 2 blocks away from the plaza, in a narrow alley behind an abandoned building, they spotted something odd in the shadows. A rifle propped carelessly against the wall. Beside it, a piece of torn fabric, darkened with what appeared to be blood. The rifle looked freshly abandoned. The chamber still smelled faintly of gunpowder. Yet there were no footprints leading away, no fingerprints on the weapon, nothing to suggest who had left it there. The blood on the cloth was sent for testing, but initial checks showed it wasn't enough to identify. Whoever the shooter was, they had left behind just enough to taunt investigators, and nothing more. The alley discovery only raised more questions. Had the shooter been injured? Did they drop the weapon in a rush to escape? Or had they deliberately staged it, knowing the police would find it and waste time chasing dead ends? By sunrise, the city of Orem was gripped in fear. Schools closed, businesses shuttered, and residents locked their doors. A killer had struck in the most public way imaginable, and then disappeared as though swallowed by the night. For investigators, the questions mounted. Was this a political assassination? A targeted killing? A random act of terror? And most of all, how had the shooter vanished in front of thousands of witnesses without a single person seeing them go? Part 1 of the story ends with that chilling mystery. The victim was dead. The weapon had been found. But the killer was nowhere to be found. And as we'll see in the next part, the deeper investigators dug into the case, the stranger the details became. The gunshot still echoed in the minds of everyone who had been there. One moment, thousands of people were leaning forward, listening to a fiery debate. The next, the stage became a scene of horror, the sound of a single rifle shot splitting the night. The crowd's reaction was immediate, chaos. People screamed and shoved, scrambling over chairs and stumbling across the plaza to escape. Some dropped their belongings, phones, bags, shoes, and the mad rushed to get away. Others froze in shock, too stunned to move. In less than a minute, the orderly audience had become a panic mob, surging in every direction. Those closest to the stage had the worst of it. Security guards tried to shield the fallen speaker, but the panic rippled so fast that even trained staff found themselves overwhelmed. A few officers climbed onto stage, guns drawn, aiming at the rooftops and scanning the darkened skyline for any sign of the shooter. But the rooftops were silent, lit only by the sweeping glow of searchlights. The eerie thing? No one, not even the officers, could identify where the shot had come from. Some swore it was from the building directly behind the stage. Others insisted it had come from the opposite side, where the university library stood tall and dark. A handful of panicked voices even claimed it came from inside the crowd. That confusion in those first minutes gave the killer the perfect advantage. Time. By 7:25 p.m., police were herding survivors toward exits. The plaza was littered with dropped belongings, protest signs trampled into the dirt, and the eerie sound of abandoned megaphones still crackling static. Medics rushed the stage, but their work was grim and futile. The speaker was pronounced dead on sight. What should have been an easy case, thousands of witnesses, dozens of cameras, a contained scene, instantly became a nightmare. Detectives later admitted that the chaos of that night cost them critical minutes. While everyone was focused on the body on stage and the stampede of terrified people, the shooter was already gone. By 7:40 p.m., the perimeter around Utah Valley University was sealed. Helicopters thundered overhead, casting beams of light across rooftops and parking lots. Patrol cars blocked off intersections, forcing vehicles to stop and be checked. But still nothing. Then came the first wave of witness reports. Police set up emergency interview stations in the university gymnasium, lining up survivors one by one to record what they'd seen. And the testimonies were baffling. One student claimed they had seen a dark figure crouched on the rooftop of the administration building. A professor swore the shot had come from the library's upper windows. A protester told officers they'd seen a man in black walking calmly away from the crowd moments after the shot, holding something long wrapped in fabric. But when investigators rushed to follow up on these leads, they all hit dead ends. The administration rooftop? Empty. No prints, no shell casings. The library windows, locked from the inside. And the supposed man in black? Not a single camera angle picked him up. It was as if the shooter had melted into the night. Meanwhile, officers combed the stage, desperate for evidence. But all they found was the victim's blood and shattered equipment. The bullet itself had passed through the speaker's chest, embedding into the wooden platform beneath his feet. Ballistics experts pulled it out and quickly confirmed what most suspected. It came from a high-powered rifle, the kind designed for precision shots, even at long range. But this discovery only deepened the mystery, because if the killer was using a long-range rifle, why had no one seen the muzzle flash? Why had no one spotted movement on the rooftops? And perhaps most baffling, how did the shooter get away when police had locked down the area within minutes? By 9 p.m., frustration was boiling. The FBI had officially taken over, setting up a mobile command post in the university parking lot. Agents huddled over maps of the campus, drawing possible escape routes. They pulled every nearby surveillance camera into their system, traffic cams, store security feeds, even private ring doorbells. But hours of footage revealed the same haunting truth. No one had captured the shooter leaving. At 11:30 p.m., with the plaza nearly clear to people, agents returned to the stage. They carefully reconstructed the shooter's line of sight, mapping out possible vantage points. One by one, they climbed the rooftops, scanning for any sign of a sniper's nest. They found nothing. No casings, no footprints, no fibers. It was as though the shooter had fired from thin air. And then, just as investigators were beginning to fear the trail was going cold, the break came. At 2:17 a.m., an officer patrolling a narrow alley just 2 blocks from the university spotted something out of place, the metallic glint of a rifle leaning against a wall. Next to it, a scrap of fabric, torn and soaked with small but distinct stain of blood. The weapon was immediately bagged and rushed to forensics. It was indeed the type used in the killing, but eerily, its surface had been wiped clean. Not a single usable fingerprint, no serial number. No traceable markings at all. Whoever abandoned it had been careful, almost too careful. The cloth, however, told a more disturbing story. The blood sample was small, but it was fresh. Did this mean the shooter had been injured during the escape? Or was it left there on purpose, a taunt to the investigators who had spent hours searching in vain? Back at the command post, agents debated endlessly. Some argued that the killer must have been a professional, someone with military or law enforcement training, given precision to the shot and the flawless escape. Others whispered darker theories. What if it was an inside job? Someone with access to the campus layout, the security plans, even the camera grids. But one thing they all agreed on, this was no random act. Whoever pulled the trigger had planned it, studied the area, and executed their escape with chilling efficiency. By sunrise, the city of Orem was in shock. The headlines screamed of assassination, of terror, of a killer on the loose. Parents kept their children home from school. Local businesses closed their doors. Residents watched from behind curtains as patrol cars swept the streets, hunting for a phantom that no one could see. The stage was now a crime scene. The plaza, once buzzing with energy, was cordoned off with yellow tape. Investigators in white suits knelt where the victim had fallen, marking every drop of blood, every fragment was splintered by the bullet. But for all their efforts, the central question remained unanswered. How had the shooter escaped? And as the first 24 hours ticked by, investigators knew something chilling. The longer the shooter remained at large, the harder it would be to catch them. But they couldn't shake the most haunting thought of all. Maybe the killer hadn't escaped in the traditional sense. Maybe they had never been where the police thought they were in the first place. That possibility would lead the FBI down one of the strangest investigative paths in modern history. By sunrise, the small city of Orem had become the center of a national storm. News vans crowded the streets. Reporters fought for space behind barricades, their voices carrying across live broadcasts that repeated the same chilling line. The shooter is still at large. The FBI command post inside the university parking lot buzzed like a hive. Dozens of agents hunched over laptops and radios, feeding data into a growing mountain of evidence. Maps of the campus lined the walls. covered in red pins and hastily scribbled notes. The rifle found in the alley sat inside a sealed evidence box, guarded by 2 armed officers. And on the far side of the tent, a team of analysts worked through the night, fast-forwarding and rewinding through hours of surveillance footage. But for every answer they found, 2 more questions emerged. The first major puzzle was the vantage point. Based on the angle of the bullet and the wound, the shot could have come from only 3 possible positions: the roof of the administration building, the upper floor of the library, or the parking garage across the street. Investigators rushed to check all 3 locations. The administration roof showed faint scuff marks, but no prints, no shell casings, no fibers. The library windows had clear sight lines, but all were locked from the inside, undisturbed. The parking garage had security cameras on every floor, but during the crucial minutes, the feeds went black. That last detail made agents uneasy. Was it a coincidence that the cameras failed at the exact moment of the shooting? Or had someone deliberately killed the feed? Next came the witnesses. Hundreds of people were interviewed, but their accounts were so wildly contradictory that they only added to confusion. Some swore the shooter had been dressed in all black. Others said it was a man in a baseball cap, seen walking calmly away. A few described shadows on the rooftops, moving in ways that didn't make sense. The conflicting testimonies made one thing clear. In the chaos of the moment, human memory was unreliable. And then there was the bloody cloth. Forensics confirmed it was real blood, not staged. But it was too small a sample to match against any known profiles. Could it have been the shooters? Or was it planted there to mislead? By noon, frustration filled the room. The FBI's lead investigator, Special Agent Daniel Reese, summed it up bluntly to his team. We have 3,000 witnesses, 200 videos, and 1 dead man on stage. And somehow no shooter. That sentence would haunt the case for months. Meanwhile, outside the command post, the world was reacting in real time. Social media exploded with speculation. Conspiracy theories spread like wildfire. Some claimed the shooter had been a ghost, a phantom who disappeared into thin air. Others argued it was a government hit job, carefully covered up, and still others whispered about something darker, that the rifle found in the alley was just a decoy, and the real weapon was never discovered at all. It was here that the investigation took its first strange turn. When analysts enhanced the audio of multiple cell phone recordings, they noticed something odd. The gunshot didn't echo like a single shot should have. Instead, it carried a strange doubling effect, as though bouncing off 2 different surfaces. Some experts believe this meant there may have been more than one shooter. If that was true, then the vanishing act wasn't a single person slipping away. It was a team working in perfect coordination. But where did that leave investigators? With no clear footage, no fingerprints, and no suspect, the FBI faced the terrifying possibility that the killer, or killers, were still in Orem, blending in with the very people they had just terrified. And that's where the case begins to shift. Because as the hours ticked by, investigators realized they weren't just chasing a shooter. They were chasing someone who knew how to vanish. If this story already has you on edge, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps bring more mysterious cases like this to light. And while you're at it, drop your theory in the comments. Do you think this was a lone gunman or a coordinated team that planned the perfect escape? By late afternoon, Special Agent Reese made a decision. He ordered an expanded search, stretching 3 miles in every direction from the university. Roadblocks were reestablished. Abandoned buildings were searched top to bottom, but still nothing. The only glimmer of progress came from one shaky cell phone video. Recorded by a panicked student running from the scene, it showed the crowd stampeding away from the plaza. But in the top corner of the frame, for less than a second, a figure could be seen. Dark clothes, a long object strapped across their back. Walking, not running. The problem? The video cut off before anyone could see where the figure went. Still, it was enough to spark a chilling theory inside the FBI. Maybe the shooter hadn't run at all. Maybe in the confusion, they had simply walked out, disguised as just another terrified civilian. That idea unsettled everyone. Because if true, the killer could have been shoulder to shoulder with officers, slipping past the very people meant to catch them. By nightfall, investigators knew they were dealing with more than just a homicide. This was a ghost in human form, someone who could pull off the impossible. But just as the case seemed to be reaching a dead end, another clue surfaced. A clue that suggested the killer had been preparing for this night far longer than anyone imagined. As the evening shadows stretched long across Orem, agents returned to the alley where the rifle had been discovered. The weapon sat sealed in evidence bags, but the location itself held a silence that unsettled even the most seasoned investigators. The alley was narrow, hemmed in by old brick buildings streaked with rain stains and ivy. Trash bins lined the walls, overflowing with plastic and paper. To most, it looked like nothing more than a forgotten corner of the city. But for the FBI, it felt like the killer's silent signature. They swept the area again, this time with forensic dogs and portable scanners. It was then that a peculiar detail caught their attention. The ground bore faint impressions, as though someone had knelt there for hours. The prints were too precise to belong to a bystander. Whoever had used this spot had been patient, steady, almost surgical. Then came the first revelation. Tucked beneath one of the bins was a crumpled note, half soaked in rainwater. At first, agents dismissed it as garbage. But under closer inspection, the handwriting made their stomachs tighten. The words read, one voice silenced, many more to go. The handwriting was jagged, rushed, but deliberate enough to feel personal. Was it genuine? A message from the killer? Or had someone planted it to fan the flames of panic? Meanwhile, inside the forensic lab, the rifle told its own story. It was a military-grade weapon, wiped clean, serial number filed down. Yet beneath the barrel, technicians found a smear of residue, gun oil mixed with an unusual chemical compound used in industrial machinery. That detail suggested the weapon hadn't come from a street dealer. It had been carefully prepared by someone who understood precision engineering. Then came the cloth. The blood was confirmed as human, male DNA. But when investigators ran it through the national database, there was no match. Whoever this was, they weren't in any known system. That alone pointed to one of two chilling possibilities. The shooter was either a first-time offender or a ghost, someone who had lived their life completely off the grid. But the night wasn't finished with its surprises. Around 11 p.m., a break came not from the FBI, but from a civilian. A young woman who lived 2 blocks from the university walked into the command post, pale and trembling. She told agents she had seen something off the night before the shooting. From her apartment window, she had watched a man carrying a long case, like a guitar bag, walking down the alley. He stopped, crouched near the very trash bin where the rifle would later be found, and sat there for nearly 20 minutes, motionless. She hadn't thought much of it then, but after hearing about the shooting, she couldn't shake the image. Her description was chillingly vague. Tall, thin, dark clothing, face hidden beneath a hood. Nothing to identify him. But one detail made the agents pause. She swore the man had been humming. A low, steady hum that carried into the night. That unnerving detail deepened the unease. What kind of person hums to themselves while preparing for an execution? At this stage, theories fractured inside the investigation. Some agents believed the killer was a professional, a contracted hitman who had been trained to leave no trace. Others insisted it was something far stranger, a domestic extremist or lone wolf who had planned a perfect disappearance. But then came the theory that rattled everyone. What if the rifle and note were deliberate decoys, planted to mislead? What if the real weapon was still out there, and the killer was watching investigators chase ghosts while preparing for something far worse? That idea shifted the case. The FBI realized they weren't just cleaning up after a crime. They were standing in the middle of an unfolding plan. And just when it seemed the trail was slipping into darkness, the investigation took a sudden, shocking turn. Because buried in the surveillance footage from a traffic cam, an analyst spotted a shadowy figure leaving the area shortly after shooting. They weren't running. They weren't panicked. They were calmly walking toward the highway, disappearing into the glow of headlights. The timestamp? Less than 15 minutes after the fatal shot was fired. The discovery of that footage reignited the hunt. But it also introduced a terrifying possibility. If the shooter could escape once, with hundreds of eyes watching, what would stop them from doing it again? The traffic camera footage became the centerpiece of the investigation. Analysts zoomed in on the shadowy figure, enhancing every pixel until the grainy silhouette sharpened just enough to reveal one critical detail: a limp. The person seen walking away from the university grounds favored their left leg, moving with a subtle drag, as if from an old injury. That limp immediately stood out. In a crowd of thousands, it was the kind of quirk that could betray a ghost. Agents pulled every medical record in the region, searching for individuals with known leg injuries who matched the witness description: tall, thin, favoring the left side. The list they compiled was massive: veterans, athletes, accident survivors. But only one name seemed to brush up against the possibility of motive: a former machinist, dismissed from his job months prior after erratic behavior and repeated clashes with management. Still, no one dared say the word suspect. The evidence was circumstantial at best. While investigators worked the lead, another discovery pushed the case in a darker direction. A second note was found, this one mailed directly to the Orem Police Department. Unlike the first, it wasn't scrawled hastily. The handwriting was neat, methodical, and the words were chilling. Voices can be replaced. Silence cannot. The letter was typed on an old mechanical typewriter, the kind almost no one used anymore. Forensic linguists studied the phrasing, pointing out that it reflected an obsession with language, with the act of speaking and silencing, that tied directly to the murder of Charlie Kirk, a man killed in the act of addressing crowd. The FBI began to wonder, was this about Charlie specifically, or was he just the first in a series of targeted silences? Meanwhile, the limp sighting gained momentum when agents cross-referenced traffic cams along the interstate. Hours after the shooting, another camera 30 miles north captured a similar figure, still limping, still carrying what appeared to be a long case slung over the shoulder. But this time, the figure wasn't alone. Two vehicles trailed closely behind. One a white van, the other a black sedan with tinted windows. Neither were reported stolen, and both vanished from the network of cameras just minutes later. The question struck the heart of the case. Was the limping figure a lone wolf or part of something bigger? Was support waiting in the shadows? The Bureau split into factions. Some agents believed the killer was a contract assassin, assisted by a team that specialized in clean getaways. Others insisted the figure in the footage wasn't even the shooter, just another red herring planted to confuse the investigation. But all theories led back to one conclusion. Whoever had pulled the trigger, they had rehearsed every step. The disappearance wasn't panic. It was choreography. The pressure on investigators grew worse when, 3 days after the shooting, a chilling package arrived at a Salt Lake City newsroom. Inside was a single VHS tape. No return address. No fingerprints. The tape, when played, showed only one thing: a dark room, a single desk lamp, and a masked figure seated in front of the camera. The mask was crude, homemade, stitched from cloth. The voice that spoke was distorted, metallic, impossible to trace. One speaker silenced. The figure said, "Many more will follow until the noise is gone." The tape ended abruptly, leaving investigators with nothing but more dread. Was this truly the shooter, or an opportunist feeding off the chaos? For the first time, the FBI considered publicly connecting the crime to a larger threat, but hesitation lingered. Declaring this the work of an organized killer, or worse, a group, risked sending an entire nation into panic. Instead, they played it quietly. The tape was locked away. The leads were chased in silence. And Orem, Utah, found itself trapped between grief and fear, waiting for an answer that never seemed to come. But the killer or killers were not done. Because just when investigators thought the trail had gone cold, another incident cracked the silence. One that proved Charlie Kirk's death was not an isolated act. 5 days after the murder of Charlie Kirk, the city of Orem was still buzzing with fear. Vigils lined the university steps with flowers, candles, and hand-painted signs that read, "Never silenced." Yet beneath the sorrow, there was a steady pulse of anxiety. Everyone knew the killer hadn't been caught. Then, on the 6th day, the silence shattered again. It was evening, just after sunset, when the 911 calls began pouring in. A local community center downtown had been evacuated after reports of gunfire. Inside, A small gathering was underway, a local pastor speaking to about 50 attendees in the auditorium. Witnesses described the chaos with trembling voices. One moment, the pastor was mid-sentence. The next, the lights flickered, and a single bullet ripped through the ceiling, embedding itself into the stage floor just feet from where he stood. Screams filled the room. People stampeded for the exits. But this time, there was no body. No one was hit. No one killed. It wasn't assassination. It was a warning. Forensic teams swept the building immediately. The bullet was lodged deep in the wood, a different caliber from the rifle used to kill Charlie Kirk. The shooter had fired from a rooftop across the street, then vanished before law enforcement arrived. The similarities were undeniable. The careful vantage point, the escape, the chilling precision. But the difference was even more disturbing. This wasn't about ending a life. This was about sending a message. The FBI's behavioral analysts pored over the incident, and their conclusion was grim. Whoever was behind this wasn't just targeting individuals. They were targeting voices, people who spoke publicly, who addressed crowds. Charlie Kirk was the first. The pastor was nearly the second. And that pattern meant the killer had a list. The community panicked. Local leaders canceled events. University lectures were postponed. Even small-town gatherings saw a drop in attendance. Fear had taken hold, exactly as the shooter, or shooters, intended. Investigators knew they were racing a clock. The second attempt meant escalation. And escalation meant the killer was moving toward something larger, something catastrophic. But then, in the swirl of panic, came another lead, one buried inside the noise of witness testimonies. A man working at a laundromat 2 blocks from the community center reported seeing someone suspicious hours before the near shooting. A tall figure, again with a limp, again carrying a long case, had entered the shop. They didn't wash clothes. They didn't speak. They simply sat there for 15 minutes, humming quietly under their breath before walking back out. It was the same eerie behavior described before the Kirk shooting. The same humming. The same unnatural calm. When agents reviewed security footage from the laundromat, their blood ran cold. The figure's face was concealed beneath a hood, but the limp was unmistakable. It was the same person seen in the traffic cam footage, the same shadow trailing into the night. The FBI had now confirmed a horrifying truth. The killer hadn't just vanished after Charlie Kirk's murder. They were still in Orem, watching, waiting. And this time, they weren't just hunting victims. They were building fear like a weapon. What came next would push investigators to their limits. Because the third message from the killer was the most disturbing of all. 3 days after the failed shooting at the community center, the killer broke their silence in a way that stunned everyone. Investigators, the public, and even seasoned journalists who had covered violence before. It began with a plain, unmarked envelope delivered to the newsroom of a Salt Lake City television station. No name, no return address. Inside was a flash drive. When the reporters loaded it onto a computer, the room fell quiet. The drive contained a single video file. The footage opened with dark screen, then slowly faded into the same crude mass scene on the earlier VHS tape. The figure sat at a desk, posture straight, hands folded neatly. Behind them was a bare wall, nothing but shadow. And then the voice came, distorted, metallic, impossible to identify. "You celebrate noise," the voice said. "You worship those who speak louder than others. But noise drowns out truth. I am not here to kill a man. I am here to silence the storm." The figure leaned forward, the camera flickering as though the recording had been made with failing equipment. Charlie Kirk was the beginning. He spoke. He filled the air with sound. Now he is quiet. The pastor was spared, not because I missed, but because silence must grow slowly, like a shadow before nightfall. Soon, more voices will fall. Not all at once. One by one, until quiet becomes the law. The screen went black. The newsroom staff sat frozen, their pulses racing. The anchor on duty whispered only 3 words. "Call the FBI." Within an hour, the video was in federal hands. Analysts dissected every frame, every pixel, every glitch in the footage. They found no reflections, no distinguishing features of the room. Even the mask appeared handmade. stitched from fabric in a way that made it impossible to identify. But two details stood out. The first, the same low hum that witnesses had described could be faintly heard beneath the distorted voice. A chilling confirmation that the masked figure and the limping man were one and the same. The second, a timestamp embedded in the video file's data. It showed the recording had been created less than 24 hours earlier, meaning the killer was not sending old footage. They were actively producing new messages, right under the FBI's nose. The Bureau faced a choice. Should they release the video to the public, risking mass panic? Or keep it hidden, knowing that silence could stoke conspiracy theories about cover-ups? In the end, they chose secrecy. Only a handful of officials and agents ever saw the full recording, but secrecy came at a price. That night, another package arrived, this time at the home of one of the lead investigators, Special Agent Daniel Reese. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, neat, unmistakable. You are looking for me. I am looking at you. You can chase shadows, but shadows don't leave footprints. The message wasn't just a taunt. It was proof the killer knew who was hunting them. Proof they were watching, stalking, moving freely while the entire city suffocated under lockdowns and fear. For Agent Reese, it was a breaking point. He gathered his team and made a vow. We will find this man, and when we do, he will never vanish again. But as the days passed, the investigation only twisted deeper, because the next event would suggest the killer wasn't just one step ahead. He had been planning this for far longer than anyone imagined. For weeks, the investigation into Charlie Kirk's murder and the chilling near shooting at the community center seemed to lead nowhere but dead ends. Every note, every video, every witness pointed in different directions, like a maze designed to keep the FBI circling endlessly. But sometimes in cases like these, the smallest detail cracks everything open. It happened late one night, inside the FBI's digital forensics lab. Analysts were combing through the video the killer had sent, frame by frame, pixel by pixel, when one of them noticed something strange. For a split second, in a corner of the screen, just before the video cut to black, a faint flicker appeared. It wasn't a shadow. It wasn't static. It was light, zoomed in and enhanced. The flicker revealed a tiny neon sign, blurred and reversed in the reflection of the killer's lamp. Only two letters were visible. Ari. Investigators scoured Orem and the surrounding towns for neon signs that matched. Hours of street footage, satellite images, and local directories were reviewed. And then, finally, someone found it. A rundown motel on the edge of town, with a flickering neon sign that read Greenridge, INN. Within hours, a tactical team was deployed. The motel was nearly abandoned, its parking lot empty save for two broken-down cars. The air smelled of mildew and cigarettes. Doors creaked on rusted hinges as agents cleared room after room, their weapons drawn, their voices sharp with tension. Finally, in room 6, they found it. The walls were covered in newspaper clippings, taped side by side until no plaster showed through. Each article circled in red ink. Speeches, rallies, church sermons, political gatherings. Anyone who stood behind a podium and spoke to a crowd was marked. Some names were scratched out. Others still gleamed in fresh ink. On the bed lay the remnants of a crude cloth mask, half-stitched. Beside it, a manual typewriter, the same one used to write the killer's messages. And in the corner, a case for a long rifle, empty, but the most haunting discovery sat on the motel desk. A single notebook, leather-bound, filled with page after page of jagged handwriting. At the top of the first page was a title, The Quiet Doctrine. The writings inside were equal parts manifesto and diary. Ramblings about noise, about voices that infect the air, about a world that would never heal until silence reigned. Some entries read like sermons, others like battle plans. But what shook the investigators most were the lists. Dates, locations, names. And at the bottom of the most recent page, a chilling entry scheduled for 3 days later. Utah State Capitol. Speaker, Senator E.M. The realization hit like a thunderclap. The killer wasn't finished. He was preparing for his most high-profile target yet. A sitting senator scheduled to speak at the state capitol steps before a crowd of thousands. The FBI had finally broken the case open, but the clock was ticking, because somewhere out there, limping through the shadows, humming under his breath, the killer was already moving toward his next stage. And the agents knew one terrible truth. If they didn't stop him this time, there would be no silencing the silence. The Utah State Capitol gleamed under the morning sun, its white dome rising against the blue sky like a watchtower. By noon, the steps would be filled with reporters, staffers, and citizens gathering to hear Senator Ames speak on education reform. But this time, the crowd wasn't just watched by cameras and journalists. Hidden in the sea of faces were more than 50 FBI agents, armed and ready. Snipers positioned on rooftops scanned every shadow. Plainclothes officers mingled with civilians. Every entry point, every alley, every rooftop had been locked down. The plan was simple. Use the senator as bait. Draw the killer out. Catch him before he could fire. But plans rarely survive the first shot. The event began smoothly. The senator stepped up to the podium, his voice carrying across the plaza, firm and unshaken despite the heavy security. Applause rippled through the crowd. The FBI held their breath, eyes darting, scanning every angle. Then, at precisely 12:17 p.m., the silence broke. A flash of light glinted from the edge of the parking garage across the street. A shot rang out, sharp, deafening. Screams erupted as people ducked for cover. The senator stumbled, but the bullet missed, ricocheting off the podium in a spray of splinters. Within seconds, agents swarmed the garage. Boots thundered up the concrete stairs. Radios crackled with frantic commands. On the top floor, they found a nest, a rifle propped on its bipod, still warm from the shot. Next to it lay a second crude cloth mask and a half-empty water bottle. But the shooter was gone. Or so they thought. A sharp whistle cut through the chaos. A sound almost like humming, carried on the wind. Agents spun toward the stairwell, weapons raised. A tall figure with a limp was descending, moving fast but steady, his hood pulled low. FBI! Drop it! The figure paused. For one heartbeat, silence. Then, without a word, he bolted. What followed was a chase that tore through the Capitol grounds. The limping man moved with astonishing speed, weaving through panicked civilians, slipping between barriers as if he had rehearsed the route 100 times. Agents pursued, shouting commands, their footsteps echoing against the marble walls. Down staircases, through service corridors, out into gardens. The chase twisted like a nightmare. Every corner turn felt like it might be the last. Finally, at the edge of the grounds, near the iron gates, the killer stumbled. Agents closed in, weapons drawn. For the first time, it seemed the phantom might actually be caught. But then came the twist. A black sedan screeched to a halt beside the gate. The back door flew open. The limping man dove inside, without hesitation. Tires screamed, smoke billowed, and within seconds, the car was gone, vanishing into the labyrinth of city streets before the FBI could even give chase. The agents stood frozen, fury and disbelief etched across their faces. They had come so close, but once again, the killer had slipped through their grasp. Back at the command post, Agent Reese slammed his fist on the table. "This isn't a ghost," he growled. "This is a man with help, and we will find him." But the realization weighed heavy. This wasn't just a lone shooter. The black sedan, the getaway, the careful planning, it was proof of something bigger. Proof the killer wasn't working alone. And as investigators pored over the evidence that night, one message became horrifyingly clear. The Capitol wasn't the climax. It was only the beginning. The failed assassination at the Utah State Capitol rattled the nation. For the first time, millions had witnessed the Phantom Killer's hand in real time, their escape captured by dozens of cameras and live broadcasts. The image of the limping figure diving into black sedan replayed endlessly on every news channel. Public fear turned to outrage. How could one man, hunted by the full force of the FBI, vanish again and again in plain sight? How could silence itself feel like the most dangerous weapon in America? Behind closed doors, the FBI pieced together what they had. The rifle, the masks, the manifesto scrawled into the quiet doctrine, the traffic cams, the notes, the humming. Every fragment of evidence built the profile of a man obsessed not with fame or money, but with the act of erasure. Yet for all their work, the Bureau remained one step behind. Leads stretched into dead ends. Suspects unraveled into nothing. And the black sedan, the most tangible clue of all, was found abandoned 2 states away. Scrubbed clean, a final insult to investigators who were beginning to feel hunted themselves. Agent Reese stood at the heart of the case. His determination hardened into obsession. Nights blurred into mornings. He read and reread the manifesto until the words haunted his sleep. And one phrase, circled in red ink by the killer himself, lingered more than the rest. Noise always returns. Silence must be permanent. It was no longer a question of if the killer would strike again. It was a matter of when. In the weeks that followed, whispers of new threats began to spread. Anonymous letters sent to churches. Strange figures loitering near lecture halls. Crowds dispersing at the faintest sound of crack or snap. A nation trained to fear its own echo. The FBI doubled its security at public gatherings, scanning rooftops, vetting every face. Yet still, no arrest, no trial, only silence. And so the story of Charlie Kirk's death, the public speaker who never made it off stage, remains unfinished. His killer, the limping phantom with the humming voice, is still out there, watching, waiting, planning. The mystery endures not because of what was found, but because of what was never caught. A ghost in human skin. A shadow that refuses to leave footprints. And maybe that's the most terrifying truth of all. Sometimes, killers don't vanish because they are clever. They vanish because the world itself gives them space to disappear. If this chilling case left you uneasy, don't let the silence stay. Break it by hitting like, sharing this video, and subscribing for more stories like this. And tell me in the comments, do you believe this killer is a lone phantom or part of a darker network that hasn't yet revealed itself?